History is often written by the victors, but legends are forged in the shadows of struggle. In the year 1940, in the hour of the dragon and the year of the dragon, a child was born in San Francisco's Chinatown. His name was Li Yun-fan, but the world would come to tremble at the name Bruce Lee. However, the icon we see today, the shredded physique, the lightning-fast strikes, the unshakable confidence, was not born. He was built. And the foundation of that building was not strength, but a profound sense of not belonging. Bruce was a child of two worlds, yet a citizen of neither. Born in America, but raised in a British-occupied Hong Kong, he was a misfit from day one. He was a child actor, a dancer, and a dreamer in a city that demanded toughness. His father was a Cantonese opera star, introducing Bruce to the world of performance early, but the performance Bruce cared most about was survival. The Hong Kong of his youth was a battlefield of street gangs and colonial tension. Being of mixed heritage, part Chinese, part European, Bruce was often rejected by his own peers. He was too Western for the locals and too Eastern for the British. This rejection didn't break him, it ignited a fire. It forced him to look inward before he ever looked outward. At 13, after a particularly brutal beating in a street fight, Bruce realized that passion without discipline is just noise. He sought out the legendary Grandmaster Ip Man to learn the art of Wing Chun. But even here, the shadow of exclusion followed him. When other students discovered his mixed ancestry, they refused to train with him. They believed martial arts secrets should only be kept for the pure-blooded. Ip Man, seeing the fire in the boy's eyes, chose to train him privately. It was during these lonely, intense hours that Bruce began to understand the first great pillar of his philosophy: the emptiness. In 2026, we are obsessed with filling our lives. We want more followers, more money, more status. We think that greatness is a process of addition, but Bruce Lee learned the opposite. Ip Man taught him that to be effective, you must be empty. If your mind is full of "I want to win" or "I am afraid to lose," there is no room for the reality of the moment. Bruce struggled with this. He was a hot-headed youth, full of ego and a desire to prove everyone wrong. One day, frustrated by his inability to remain calm during training, Bruce went out to sea in a small boat. He punched the water in anger, but the water didn't care. It simply moved around his fist and returned to its original state. That was the Satori, the moment of sudden enlightenment. He realized that water was the ultimate warrior. It had no shape, yet it could wear down the hardest stone. It had no ego, yet it was the most powerful force in nature. He realized that he had been fighting himself his whole life. He had been trying to be a solid thing, a great fighter, a tough guy, a famous actor. But to be a thing is to be breakable. To be a process, like water, is to be indestructible.
This is the lesson for you in 2026. The weak you that we talked about in the Goggins video is the version of you that is rigid. It's the version that says, "I can't do this," or "This is who I am." Bruce Lee's life tells us that who you are is a lie. You are not a static object. You are a flow of energy. When you empty your cup of the old labels, the old fears, and the old excuses, you become capable of holding the infinite power of the universe. By the time he was 18, Bruce Lee was a cha-cha champion and a veteran of 100 street fights. He was a philosopher king in the body of a street urchin. But the authorities in Hong Kong had seen enough of his Monkey King antics. His parents, fearing he would end up in prison or dead, sent him back to America with nothing but $100 in his pocket and a head full of ideas that would eventually change the world. He arrived in Seattle not as a master, but as a student. He enrolled at the University of Washington, majoring in philosophy. He didn't just study how to punch, he studied why we punch. He studied Socrates, Plato, and Descartes, looking for the bridge between the physical and the spiritual. He realized that most people are living a concept of themselves rather than living their truth. They spend their whole lives building a self-image and then become slaves to protecting it. This is the chapter of the void. It is the stage where you realize that everything you thought gave you strength, your anger, your pride, your past, is actually the weight that is drowning you. To move like the little dragon, you must be willing to let go of the shore. You must be willing to be nobody before you can become the greatest. You must understand that the void isn't a place of nothingness, it is a place of pure potential. In the next stage of his journey, Bruce would take this emptiness and turn it into a weapon. He would stop being a student of styles and start being a student of truth. But before the world could see the master, the man had to survive the silence. He had to learn that the hardest opponent he would ever face wasn't a man in the ring, it was the man in the mirror. 1964, Long Beach, California. The martial arts world was a rigid landscape of traditional styles. Karate practitioners stood in stiff stances, performing katas that had remained unchanged for centuries. Then a 24-year-old Bruce Lee stepped onto the mat. He didn't wear a traditional gi, he wore a simple kung fu outfit. He didn't perform a long artistic dance. Instead, he performed 2-finger push-ups and delivered a 1-inch punch that sent a full-grown man flying backward into a chair. This wasn't just a demonstration, it was a declaration of war against mediocrity. Bruce was telling the world that the old ways were dead. He called it Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist. But Jeet Kune Do was more than a set of moves, it was a scientific revolution. While the rest of the world was focused on mystical energy, Bruce was focused on physics, biomechanics, and nutrition. He was decades ahead of his time. In 2026, we talk about optimal performance, but Bruce was living it in the 1960s. He studied European fencing to understand the concept of the stop hit. He studied Western boxing to master the footwork of Muhammad Ali. He was the first truly mixed martial artist. He didn't care about the origin of a technique, he only cared if it worked. Absorb what is useful, reject what is useless, and add what is essentially your own, became his mantra. His training was a masterclass in obsession. Bruce was a human laboratory. He experimented with early electrical muscle stimulation, isometric training, and high-intensity interval running, things that wouldn't become mainstream for another 40 years. He realized that the body is an instrument, and if you want to play a masterpiece, you must keep that instrument in perfect tune. He was one of the first to realize that strength without speed is a liability. He didn't lift weights to look like a bodybuilder. He lifted to become a faster, more explosive version of himself. He was obsessed with economy of motion, the idea of using the least amount of energy to achieve the maximum result. In 2026, we call this efficiency, but for Bruce, it was a spiritual pursuit. But as his physical power grew, he hit a wall that no punch could shatter, the wall of 1960s Hollywood racism. After his Long Beach demonstration, he was discovered by a producer and cast as Kato in The Green Hornet. This should have been his big break, but Hollywood wasn't ready for a leading Asian man. When the show began filming, the director gave Bruce an instruction that almost broke his heart: slow down. His movements were so fast that the 24 frames per second cameras of the 1960s couldn't capture them. On playback, all the audience saw was a blur. Bruce Lee was literally too fast for the technology of his time. Even though he was the most skilled person on the set, he was still just the sidekick. He had to wear a mask. He had fewer lines. When the show was promoted in America, the lead actor got all the credit. But when the show aired in Hong Kong, it was called The Kato Show. The people of his homeland saw the truth, but the power players in America were blind. Bruce pitched a show called The Warrior, a story about a Chinese martial artist in the American West. The producers loved the idea, but they didn't cast Bruce. They said an Asian man couldn't carry a show. They took his idea, renamed it Kung Fu, and gave the lead role to a white actor. This was the moment of decision. This is where most people would have quit. This is where the weak you would have said, "The system is against me, I should just give up." But Bruce Lee was a warrior of the mind. He didn't get bitter, he got better. He realized that if Hollywood wouldn't give him a seat at the table, he would build his own house. He decided to leave the safety of America and return to Hong Kong. He told his wife, Linda, "I'm going to go back and I'm going to become a star so big that Hollywood will have to beg me to come back." He was betting everything on himself. He was 30 years old, he had a family to support, and he was broke, but he had his philosophy. He knew that the struggle was the training. He didn't want an easy life. He wanted the strength to endure the one he had chosen. He went back to Hong Kong and signed a deal with Golden Harvest for a movie called The Big Boss. He was making $7,500 for the entire film, pennies compared to Hollywood. But the money didn't matter. The expression mattered. When The Big Boss premiered in Hong Kong, the audience was silent when the credits rolled. Short pause. Bruce thought he had failed. Then, a second later, the theater exploded. The people weren't just cheering for a movie, they were cheering for the man who had finally shown the world what a Chinese man could be. He had shattered the docile servant stereotype with a single flying kick. He had become a symbol for every marginalized person on the planet. The dragon had finally woken up, and he was about to set the world on fire. The year was 1973. Bruce Lee had done the impossible. He had conquered Hong Kong, shattered box office records, and proved that an Asian man could be the most charismatic force on any screen. Hollywood, the same industry that had once told him a yellow man couldn't lead a film, came crawling back. They offered him a co-production between Warner Brothers and his own company, Concord Production. The film was Enter the Dragon. Short pause. This wasn't just another movie, it was Bruce's masterpiece. He fought for every detail, from the philosophical dialogue to the title itself. He knew this was his moment to show the entire world that his art of expressing the human body was universal. The production of Enter the Dragon was as legendary as the film itself. Shot on location in Hong Kong with a tiny budget of $850,000, it was a clash of cultures and high-stakes pressure. Bruce worked himself to the bone, often skipping meals and sleep to choreograph fights that didn't just look cool, but felt real. He used real martial artists as stuntmen, including future legends like Jackie Chan and Sammo Hung. In the iconic opening scene, Bruce used an armbar to defeat his opponent, a move that, in 2026, we recognize as a precursor to modern MMA. He was painting a picture of the future of combat, while the rest of the world was still stuck in the past. But the weight of being a global bridge between East and West was beginning to take its toll.
On July 20th, 1973, just 6 days before Enter the Dragon was set to premiere in Hong Kong, the world stopped. At only 32 years old, in the absolute peak of his physical and mental power, the dragon fell. Bruce Lee had complained of a headache while discussing his next project, Game of Death. He took a nap and never woke up. The official cause of death was recorded as cerebral edema, a swelling of the brain. But because a legend can never die a normal death, the world spent the next 50 years searching for another answer. Some blamed a family curse, others whispered about a secret assassination by Chinese triads, or a dim mak, delayed death touch, delivered by a rival master. In recent years, leading up to 2026, scientists have proposed a more poetic yet tragic theory, the hyponatremia hypothesis. They suggest that Bruce Lee, the man who preached "be water," may have actually been killed by water, specifically his kidneys' inability to excrete the excess fluid he consumed to stay hydrated during his intense training. It is a haunting irony that the element he admired most, the one that made him formless and unstoppable, may have been what finally reclaimed him. He died before he could see Enter the Dragon become a global phenomenon, grossing over $2 billion adjusted for inflation, and changing the face of action cinema forever. But to speak of Bruce Lee's death is to ignore the fact that he never actually left. In 2026, Bruce Lee is more than a movie star. He is a spiritual North Star. His face is plastered on billboards in Seattle, murals in Hong Kong, and across the digital landscape of social media. Why? Because in a world that feels increasingly fake, Bruce Lee represents the art of being yourself. He didn't want you to be a repetition robot. He didn't want you to follow a fixed style. He wanted you to look inside your own soul and find the truth that only you can express. His legacy in 2026 is the bridge he built. He was the first person to show that a man from the East could be a hero to a man in the West. He broke the stereotypes of the Fu Manchu villain and the docile servant. He proved that your background, your race, and your height don't define your limits. Only your mind does. He taught us that knowing is not enough, we must apply. Willing is not enough, we must do. As you look at your own life today, ask yourself, are you being the wall or are you being the water? Are you praying for an easy life, or are you building the strength to endure a difficult one? The world of greats isn't a museum of dead people. It's a living blueprint for your own potential. Bruce Lee showed us that the key to immortality is first living a life worth remembering. He lived only 32 years, but he made those years echo through eternity. The dragon didn't leave us in 1973. Every time you push through a plateau, every time you reject a useless habit, and every time you choose to express yourself honestly instead of following the crowd, the dragon is right there with you. 2026 is your year to be formless, your year to be shapeless, your year to be unstoppable. Be water, my friends.